Hi, my name is Ben Hine and I'm Professor of Applied Psychology at the University of West London. And I'm really sorry that I can't be delivering this live. I've had something come up in the time slot, but I will be answering the kind of four key questions that all the speakers have been asked to answer. So the first question is, what is PA, or what is parental alienation? There are a lot of definitions that exist, and actually some people have taken that as an opportunity to attack the subject area and say, well, because there's so many definitions flying about, that must mean it's not a solid concept. What I would argue is the reason there's a lot of definitions is actually a positive thing. I think it's that we've been taking time to really drill down into what this concept means, and when you are doing that with a phenomenon, you will always get an evolution of the definitions. And actually, when you look across all of those definitions, you see a core thread. And what that core thread is that parental alienation is the outcome, it's the manifestation where a child is resisting or refusing contact with a parent based on the actions taken by the other parent, and in absence of any deficient parenting on the side of the rejected parent. And what that's really capturing is this idea that there are circumstances where parent A, let's call them, will engage in behaviours, or parental alienating behaviours, or alienating behaviours, whatever we want to call them, that will attack and disrupt the parent-child bond between that child and the other parent, parent B. So what we have is a process, which are the alienating behaviours, or the ABs, and then we have an outcome, which is parental alienation. And it's a situation where the child is rejecting or resisting contact with that parent who was a previously healthy, loving parent, a good enough parent that wasn't abusive or neglectful, and that relationship is now sufficiently disrupted, and the child is manifesting the outcome of that as well, in terms of their representations of behaviour. So that's what parental alienation is. And the second question is being asked what my position on parental alienation is and why. Well, I don't really like the term position, because position kind of implies an opinion. And what my take on that question is that there really shouldn't be huge scope for positionality on the issue, because fundamentally our opinions around parental alienation should be, or our positions as it were, should be informed by the empirical evidence. And it is clear to me within the reading of the literature, and I think if you take the body of literature that we have at the moment available to us on this phenomenon, I feel that the correct position to take on it is that parental alienation is a well-defined, well-researched phenomenon. It is not theoretical, as in it is, actualized in reality. It's not a false concept. It is supported by both empirical evidence and lived experiences in abundance, and that has been proven by several kind of reviews that have come out, including my own. And there is a wealth of evidence around what it looks like, what context it manifests in, how it's different from quote-unquote justified estrangement, and how it falls into the broader category of PCCP, so parent-child contact problems, and the range of reasons why a child may reject a parent. It has a place within that. We have substantive evidence around how it's measured. We are beginning to get more and more evidence around its prevalence. So I've just conducted the first UK studies on this, showing that between 40 and 60% of separated parents report alienating behaviours, having experienced them. And I think it was 97% of children report at least one alienating behaviour in their childhood. Adults reporting on their childhood experiences report at least one PAB exposure. So we're also getting evidence then on the impact, and its profound impact on children who are alienated and also alienated parents. as well as then the manifestations of PA in legal contexts, and then how we intervene in terms of reunification. And I think it's here where the positionality on PA can develop more, and I have more acceptance of positionality when we're looking at how it manifests in the legal context and what we do about it, because there are varying opinions there. Again, I think sometimes those could be more empirically supported. It appears to me from the majority of the studies that have been done on case analysis, looking at different cases, that parental alienation is certainly not just a legal device utilised by fathers to minimise their abuse. That certainly happens in some cases, but actually there is again a wealth of evidence to demonstrate that this is a legitimate legal concept that's founded in psychological principles, and that it's actually more commonly brought up when that party is also experiencing domestic abuse themselves. So it actually suggests that parental alienation is part of a suite of abuse rather than a counter to abuse, in terms of it being its only purpose. Of course, all of those different dynamics do exist. So in terms of my position, I think it's a very, very empirically validated and supported concept. I think we do a great disservice to those experiencing parental alienating behaviours to deny its existence, and I think we need to have a much more productive conversation around what it is and what we can do about it in order to move forward. The third question is, what changes are needed and why? And I've kind of covered some of this in the second question, in that I think one of the broadest things that's needed is a change in dialogue and a change in how we speak about the issue. There are other things that people argue for. Do we need a change in the name? Do we need to change this, change that? It's particularly around language. I don't think that's necessarily needed. I think I understand and I sympathise with the fact that parental alienation as a term has potentially a checkered history. I don't think that's where we are now, and I actually think that parental alienation and alienating behaviours are the right language. The changes that are needed are, like I said, around that collegiate approach to it. I think people are becoming very entrenched in their positions on the subject and becoming closed off to new evidence. I think that we, of course, need more research, always, to further understand, validate, conceptualize the concept itself. But in terms of what matters to me directly, I have always been a big proponent of the fact that the most effective way to intervene in alienating behaviours is to ensure that they don't arise in the first place. And so early intervention in this area is absolutely critical. And we don't see enough of it, particularly in my country, in the UK. We do not have enough support for separating parents, which means that they, when left to their own devices, are susceptible to leaning into and succumbing to some of those narratives, to falling into polarised camps, to ending up in court and becoming entrenched, which makes opportunities for alienation more rife and the impact of it so much worse. So I think we need early intervention to support individuals and address the psychological and clinical and attachment-based traumas that are underpinning the behaviours. Because so often this is played out in a legal setting, and there is, of course, a role for the legal system in terms of addressing these behaviours. Of course there is. Because, with some individuals, you're never going to be able to provide that early intervention. They're not going to respond to it, and the only thing they will respond to is legal. That being said, often what happens is when people get into that legal system, it makes things worse, and in some cases actually facilitates the behaviours. So what's always mattered to me, and this comes from a point of a researcher, but also as an alienated child who was the subject of a very acrimonious divorce proceeding, I think the earlier the intervention can come, the better. Addressing the underlying psychological factors that are leading to the behaviours in the first instance. That being said, we don't live in a perfect world. We know that some people are going to end up in legal settings, and I think in that arena, what changes are needed are to fully acknowledge, comprehend, address the way that courts are structured in the way that they apply different stereotypes around mothers and fathers, their roles, the stigma around these behaviours, the lack of understanding within the profession around the behaviours, the psychology behind them, what we can do about them. All of that needs to also be addressed within the legal system. And we need a lot more evidence on what works in terms of reunification. And I think, again, bringing me back to my first point, one of the biggest issues with reunification and treatment and intervention for alienating behaviours is that once parties are entrenched in their position and once these behaviours have been enacted, it is very hard to intervene. And I think that's why you get such mixed results. I think that's why there's such mixed dialogue around the effectiveness of intervention at the moment, because it isn't clear. Because a lot of the time you're dealing with such a wide array of different behaviours, different actions, different levels of alienation, different actors within that game with different psychology behind their motivations. I think actually if we stripped it back and tried to tackle it much earlier, then we'd solve that intervention issue. So what can attendees do now? I think my main call to action is always to become as familiar as possible with the current state of evidence. I think I have too many conversations with people who are talking about outdated opinions, outdated studies, outdated perspectives that have come a long way. We've done a huge amount of work in this area over the past 15 to 20 years, especially with particular academics, Jennifer Harman, Bill Burnett, myself, really trying to provide a clearer, more empirically based evidence base for this, more empirical, more objective evidence base for this phenomenon. So I think it's about getting on top of that, and I think it's about making those kind of clear, structured appeals to the systems that matter the most and the policymakers, and getting a way into the subject that is less controversial. Now, one of the ways that we might consider doing that is by using certain language. So, for example, whilst I agree that parental alienation is the right term, and I certainly use it in my work and I would keep using it, that it may well be the most prudent and practical thing to not use that terminology if you're approaching policymakers, if you're trying to hold a forum to enact political change. And so, be pragmatic. Think about how you can frame it in a clear way. Talk about it in terms of parent-child bonds, parent-child contact problems, etc. I would also make sure, and one of the key things that I would also say to individuals in terms of their actions is making sure that you are always child-oriented. I think sometimes some of these really important conversations can be derailed through focusing too much on parent rights. And of course, alienated parents go through a terrible time. I think if we focus too much of our conversation on parent rights and looking at the alienated parents, I think it's all too easy to dismiss them as, oh, they're just one side of two sides of a story. Whereas if we focus on the child and the child needs, again, which is supported by the evidence that children should, unless there's demonstrable risk of harm, have a continued relationship with both parents, then we can make real inroads. So, like I said, it's a real pleasure to be able to speak. I'm sorry I can't do it live. I'm really open to any kind of questions and further interests from audience members. I have a book. It's called Parental Alienation, a Contemporary Guide for Parents, Policymakers and Practitioners, and it's available on Amazon. I've also got a number of publications around this area, including my review from last year, which you can look up online. I think my closing statement would be taking me right back to the start to say this is a serious problem, and one of the things that we uncovered in our prevalence studies and some of the work I've done with fathers particularly is the link between parental alienation and suicide ideation and completion. We saw a clear correlation in our study that those who had higher exposure to PAVs had a higher suicide ideation score. I've seen it in the work I've done with fathers where 40% of the fathers that were coming for support post-separation said they'd had suicide ideation in the previous 12 months. And parents have reported it in numerous targeted parent studies, including by Lee Maturana et al., where parents describe the profound impact that alienating behaviours have on their mental health. So if anybody would also like to talk exploring that more and the link between PA and suicide in Australia and beyond, then I would be more than happy to do so and to talk about some study ideas. I hope that was useful. I hope that my contribution is well received. And like I said, if anybody has any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. Thank you.